The views expressed in this episode, as well as all episodes of Mystican Identity, are solely host opinions. The content here should not be taken as indisputable fact. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. So welcome to a special Halloween episode of Mystican Identity, and tonight we venture into the shadowed realms of mysticism. It's a world where the divine meets the supernatural, and where mystics have danced with forces beyond the physical. In the spirit of Halloween, we'll explore a side of mysticism often whispered but rarely spoken aloud, where visions, levitations, and otherworldly phenomena define explanation. I also want to explain that this episode, while discussing supernatural experiences that seem fantastical, is meant to also be in the spirit of fun. The beloved has a fun side too, and I feel many times that the mystic is pictured as being quite serious and, rigid, I suppose. And I find that sometimes through these myths, it's a neat way of shaking me out of the sensory influence that is always on me. The world influences, and it drops me into a place where I'm contemplating the interaction between the formless and the form. So I just have a few examples that I'm going to share today as the first Halloween episode. And as we journey along into the future, I'm going to prepare to have even more for the years to come. So without further introduction, let's dive into some of these stories. So, imagine a woman, deep in prayer, surrounded by candlelight in the stillness of a monastery. She begins to feel weightless, her body lifting from the ground as though drawn by some unseen force. This is not fiction. It is the reported reality of Saint Teresa of Ávila, a Spanish nun whose visions and supernatural experiences captivated and terrified her fellow sisters. Saint Teresa of Ávila, known for her deep, unshakable faith, spent her days in a quiet monastery, where shadows danced on stone walls lit by flickering candlelight. Nights in the convent were silent, except for the murmurs of her whispered prayers. Yet, in that silence, Teresa felt a force moving within her, a sensation as intense as it was inexplicable. One evening, as she knelt in prayer, Teresa felt a familiar yet unsettling feeling of weightlessness. She'd later describe it as if some invisible hand had reached down, lifting her off the ground. Her body, she recounted, felt as light as air drawn upward by an indescribable power. When her fellow nuns saw her rise, they stood frozen, hands over their mouths in shock and awe. They could only watch as her face, illuminated by candlelight, took on this otherworldly glow, and her lips trembled as if in communion with a presence beyond the veil of this world. But Teresa, even with all her faith, was fearful of these experiences. She later wrote that she would plead with God to keep her grounded, asking, "Lord, do not let this happen in public, lest I be accused of pride or deceit." Yet the visions and levitations continued, each one drawing her deeper into the mystery of the divine. To Teresa, these experiences felt like an otherworldly force piercing her heart. She described it as a flaming arrow, an overwhelming blend of ecstasy and agony. For Saint Teresa, her levitations and visions were more than mystical. They were a reminder of a reality that lay just beyond human reach, a glimpse, perhaps, of what we might call the supernatural. From the divine ecstasies of Saint Teresa, we journey centuries forward to a figure no less mysterious, Padre Pio. Padre Pio was an Italian friar who became a legend in his own time. Known for his profound compassion and unwavering faith, Pio's supernatural abilities began to surface in ways that would leave believers and skeptics alike searching for answers. Years after St. Teresa's time, Padre Pio began experiencing supernatural events that would confound believers and skeptics alike. People came from distant villages, braving winding mountain roads to catch a glimpse of the man rumored to bear the wounds of Christ. They would say that when you met Padre Pio, you could feel something otherworldly in his presence. One morning, as he knelt in prayer, Padre Pio felt this sharp, agonizing pain in his hands and feet. Blood began to seep from his skin, staining his robes, marks of what would become known as, which I'm sure many of you know, is a stigmata. News of these wounds spread quickly, and soon crowds gathered, hoping to witness this living miracle. But for Padre Pio, the stigmata was a heavy cross to bear, a reminder that suffering was both physical and spiritual. Over time, as things naturally do, stories began circulating of Padre Pio's ability to appear in two places at once, an ability that is known as bilocation. Pilgrims swore that they had seen him miles away from the monastery offering comfort to the sick or delivering last rites to the dying. Even the church struggled to explain how a man bound to one place could be seen by so many in so many different places. When asked about these supernatural abilities, Padre Pio would bow his head and quietly say, "It is not I, but God who works through me." To him, these experiences were humbling, reminders of a divine mystery beyond his understanding. Yet, for those who witnessed them, Padre Pio was a bridge to the supernatural, a living reminder that perhaps the boundaries of our reality are not as solid as we believe. Our final step on this journey takes us eastward to the mystics of the Sufi tradition. And here we have the dervishes. And these were seekers of divine truth, and it was really cool. They used dance and music to reach states of ecstasy, states where, they claimed, the self dissolved entirely and only the presence of the divine remained. In dim, candlelit rooms or out under the stars, the dervishes would whirl faster and faster until they felt as though they were one with the cosmos itself. One famous Sufi mystic, Jalaluddin Rumi, spoke of an angelic presence that would come to him in his deepest moments of ecstasy. He described this presence as so overwhelming, so beautiful, that words could never capture its essence. Through their ecstatic practices, these mystics believed they were glimpsing the very heart of the divine, a realm beyond time, beyond space, where the veil between the physical and spiritual thinned to nothing. It was this pursuit of divine love, this desire to lose themselves in the mystery of existence, that drove the Sufi mystics. To this day, their whirling dance remains a living symbol for the search for unity, for transcendence. And as we reflect on these stories of levitation, stigmata, divine ecstasy, we're left with one question. What lies beyond the ordinary world? Perhaps, as these mystics believed, a reality more vast and mysterious than we can ever imagine. Our journey continues with Neem Karoli Baba, and he was a 20th century guru whose quiet presence masked a profound spiritual power. For those who met him, Baba seemed to exist on a boundary between worlds, possessing knowledge and abilities that defied explanation. Followers would sit by him only to hear him reveal details about their lives. Secrets that they had never spoken aloud, worries they'd never shared with anybody. And as things normally go, the stories about Neem Karoli Baba grew as his followers shared what they had witnessed. They spoke of seeing him in places he could not have physically traveled to, yet there he would be offering comfort to someone in need, which led people to believe that he could bilocate, appearing to his devotees when they needed him most, even if miles separated them. Pretty cool. In one particular mysterious incident, Baba was said to have blessed a small group of followers only to disappear from sight moments later. Knock yourself out, David Blaine. Oh, I love David Blaine. He's awesome. But this was a silent reminder of the otherworldly nature that seemed to surround Neem Karoli Baba. To Baba, these phenomena were never something to dwell on or seek out. He would just smile humbly, as though his powers were simply part of a greater mystery beyond his own identity. To his devotees, however, Baba's life was a glimpse into the supernatural, It was a reminder that there exists a reality where mind and body are no longer bound by the ordinary, and where the divine presence shines through in moments of profound mystery. So, as we've seen, mystical experiences can bring moments of divine union and transcendence. But not all encounters with the supernatural are bathed in light, so to speak. Some mystics have found themselves face to face with darkness, haunted, or so it seems, by forces intent on testing the limits of their souls. One such example would be Saint John of the Cross, who was a Spanish mystic, poet, and a major figure in the Counter-Reformation. His concept of the dark night of the soul has become central to Christian mysticism. It's better described as a period in the spiritual journey where the soul feels abandoned by God, plunged into a state of deep spiritual desolation. Yet this is considered a necessary phase in the path toward divine union. The dark night isn't simply about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's seen more as a purgatory-ish process. And through it, one sheds attachments, ego, and desires that obscure the true self's connection to God, that divine ground. It's a form of spiritual, quote, death, unquote, where the soul feels lost, confused, and cut off from the divine light. Yet this darkness is paradoxically a stage before greater enlightenment. For Saint John of the Cross, the spiritual journey wasn't always filled with light and ecstasy. In fact, he believed that to reach the divine, the soul had to pass through an intense period of darkness, a time when all sense of God's presence vanishes and the soul feels utterly abandoned. It's a time when prayer feels empty, hope fades, and faith is tested to a breaking point. Yet, St. John believed that this darkness was not a punishment, but a form of purification, a necessary passage on the path to enlightenment. In the midst of this desolation, the soul is being prepared for something greater. St. John taught that the dark night of the soul is not a sign of failure, but a necessary step toward transformation. Through the darkness, the soul sheds its attachment to the ego, to desires, and even to the comforting sense of God's presence. What emerges on the other side is a soul purified, ready to experience a deeper, more intimate union with the divine, a union beyond words, beyond light, and beyond the self. For many people today, the dark night of the soul can be recognized in moments of profound loss, spiritual crisis, or existential doubt. It's that place where the familiar pathways of faith no longer seem to lead anywhere. And yet, St. John reminds us that this darkness is not the end. It's a sacred space, a crucible, where the soul is refined, stripped of illusion, and prepared for a union with the divine that transcends our understanding. And this is pretty interesting because darkness in St. John's vision is not the opposite of light. Essentially, it's the companion of light. Just as night gives way to day, the dark night of the soul gives way to the brilliance of divine union. Our experience on this plane is constantly an experience of duality. That's what the myth of the Garden of Eden describes. In fact, there are like a number of myths throughout the Bible that explain the event of unity becoming duality and separating from unity with the beloved. On this plane, there's no foreground without a background, just as you can't have something without nothing. And back to St. John, through the cold and silence, the soul is being prepared to receive a light so pure, so overwhelming that only by first enduring the darkness can it be understood. So that in the depths of despair, the mystic learns that even here, in the shadow, the divine is at work, transforming the soul from within. And this is very interesting to me personally, because I don't align with the beloved's presence vanishing, because it's always here, it's always everywhere. But I have gone through times where I feel like I'm losing that experience, if you know what I mean, that feeling is wearing off, so to speak. And I start to pray or meditate on my concern that I'm losing my connection. I hope I'm wording that correct, but it's really the only way I can put it. So like losing that connection. And then it's funny because when I start praying or meditating on that, I get this still small voice that says, well, if you were losing the experience, you wouldn't be concerned about how to hold on to it. And for some reason, that's when I just feel refreshed, kind of like waking up and, oh, yes, that's right. And then I just continue on from there. Among the mystics who walked the fine line between light and shadow was Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard was a 20th century visionary whose life was filled with visions that were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Hildegard described her visions as bursts of intense light. Yet within that light, she often saw images that were as dark as they were prophetic. One night, she recounted a vision that seemed to hold all of humanity's deepest fears. She saw a fiery storm tearing across the sky, filled with monstrous creatures, beasts that were both beautiful and fearsome, with eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. They surrounded her as if warning of an impending danger, something beyond human understanding, if you know what I mean. And Hildegard later interpreted these dark images as symbols of the spiritual dangers that humanity faced, a vision of what might come if they lost sight of the divine. And this reminds me very much of like the book of Revelation, which in order to be truly understood has to be read as if a person explaining a dream they had. Like, for example, I know I've had dreams where, for example, I will describe to say, well, you were in the dream, but you didn't look like you. You looked like someone else, and it could even be someone I've never seen before. It was you, but it was someone I've never met before. And it could quite be that the person you've never met before has physical traits or things that represent how you interpret the message of the dream. And sorry, I kind of weaved off there. So let's get back to Hildegard. And as Hildegard embraced these visions, even though they were terrifying, she believed that they were gifts meant to guide her, to reveal a truth that lay beneath the surface of the world. She would later write that in each dark image, she sensed a call to action, a reminder of the importance of faith, of unity, and of seeing the divine even in the most unsettling of forms. For Hildegard, these encounters were not simply visions, but messages, glimpses of a reality beyond our visible world, a reality both beautiful and dark, which drew her even deeper into the mystery of existence. Other mystics have described encounters with what they saw as demonic or negative forces. The Desert Fathers and Mothers, early Christian mystics who sought solitude in the barren deserts, reported fierce spiritual battles. They wrote of strange visions, temptations, and disturbing voices that haunted them in their isolation. Yet to them, these experiences were part of a spiritual cleansing, a trial they believed brought them closer to divine truth. These dark encounters remind us that the path to the divine is not always one of peace and light and all the nice, beautiful things that we use to explain the experience. Sometimes, as these mystics discovered, it requires a journey through shadows, through the unknown, to reach the heart of the mystery. I mean, I don't think anybody is a stranger to the verse, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I mean, that evidence right there that at certain times it's not always beautiful and easy. There are periods of shadows and darkness and emptiness. So as we near the end of our Halloween journey, we find ourselves on the edge of one final mystery, the afterlife. And I so wanted to put in that keyboard from Prince Let's Go Crazy. That would have been perfect. But I don't know if I can get in trouble for that, so just pulling it back. Across time, mystics have claimed glimpses into what lies beyond death, often experiencing visions and encounters with spirits that seem to bridge the divide between the living and the dead. In the heart of medieval England, there was a small cell attached to a church, and in that small cell lived a woman whose visions would ripple through the centuries, Julian of Norwich. Julian was struck with a near-fatal illness, and she believed that she was at death's door when in the midst of her suffering she began to experience a series of intense and vivid visions. These weren't dreams or just mere imaginings, but encounters with the divine that would change the course of her life. Julian described these visions as showings in which the veil between this world and the divine was lifted. In one of her most famous visions, she saw something so simple, yet so profound. It was a small hazelnut lying in the palm of her hand. She looked at the hazelnut and wondered, "What is this?" And in that moment, she understood that the hazelnut represented all of creation, small, fragile, and yet held in the loving care of God. Julian realized that this tiny object was a symbol of the entire universe, and yet, as the hazelnut was loved and sustained by God, so too was every living thing. God made it, she wrote, God loves it, and God keeps it. So this vision is simple. It's nice, it's simple, but it was a revelation for Julian as it showed her the intimate connection between the divine and the material world. To her, the universe was not distant or indifferent, but alive with divine love and care. She came to understand that everything in creation, no matter how small or insignificant, was part of the divine ground, a reflection of God's infinite love. In holding that tiny hazelnut, Julian realized the vastness of divine love. It was a symbol that, in God's eyes, nothing is insignificant. The supernatural, to Julian, wasn't far removed from daily life. It was present in every leaf, every stone, every breath. The divine and the natural were not separate but intertwined, that interconnectedness, held together by the same love that sustains the cosmos. In her most vivid vision, Julian saw Christ suffering on the cross, a moment of intense pain and sorrow. Yet, even as she witnessed this suffering, she was filled with divine peace. A voice spoke to her, reassuring her with words that have echoed through time. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Awesome. It was a profound reminder that even in the darkest moments, God's love is present, working through the mysteries of suffering to bring about healing and redemption. Julian's experiences were not fleeting moments. They became the foundation of her life, and she would spend decades reflecting on their meaning. Her writings, later known as Revelations of Divine Love, became one of the most significant works of Christian mysticism, offering a unique perspective on the divine that continues to inspire seekers of all faiths, much like the perennial philosophy. I feel that Julian's life reminds us that the supernatural and the divine are not distant concepts, so to speak, but are deeply woven into the fabric of everyday existence. For other mystics, encounters with the afterlife came through direct communication with spirits or visions of loved ones. Many believed these encounters were granted to them to deepen their understanding of the divine ground, a reminder that life and death are not opposites but part of the same spiritual journey. Much like you can't have a coin without two sides. The coin is the whole, but it has to have two sides. These glimpses of the afterlife offered comfort and mystery alike, a reassurance that beyond our mortal existence lies a realm woven with love, unity, and an infinite unknown. And for the mystic, the afterlife is not a distant concept, but a reality so close it seems to break through into this world. An invitation, perhaps, one might say, to view death not as an end, but a transition to a deeper form of life. And so, as our Halloween journey through mysticism and the supernatural draws to a close, we find ourselves pondering the mysteries these stories have opened. From ecstatic visions to encounters with the shadowed unknown, each of these mystics ventured beyond the ordinary world into realms where worlds and reason often falter. Their experiences remind us that life is filled with hidden layers, dimensions that we cannot see but sometimes feel, They invite us to view the supernatural not as something distant or frightful, but as a reminder of the divine ground that connects all things even beyond life and death. So tonight, as the veil between worlds grows thin, let these stories hang on a little bit with you. Perhaps, as the mystics believed, there's more to our existence than we imagine, a vast mystery unfolding, of which all of us are part of it. And as we've explored the supernatural encounters of mystics, whether it's St. Teresa's levitations, Padre Pio's bilocation, or Neem Karoli Baba's miraculous presence, one question lingers for me. How do we understand these experiences? Are they meant to be mysteries, or do they point to a deeper reality, like one in which the boundaries between mind and matter, self and world, are not as solid as they may seem? In the perennial philosophy, even, in the chapter, The Nature of the Ground, which I was covering before I took a little bit of a break with last week and also this one doing the Halloween, it just felt natural to kind of deviate from that and come back. But I began on touching on the nature of the ground in that chapter, and in it, Aldous Huxley describes 4 ways in which the mind affects the body. And I'll just go into those really briefly, just touch on them because they link in with this episode, the Halloween episode, but then they'll also come into effect when I bounce back to doing the perennial, so I don't really want to cover it too much here, but it's great to touch on it. The first is through subconscious learned behavior. Through repeated experiences, the mind becomes, I like to say, programmed to produce automatic responses. Best way I can relate these is like defense mechanisms or knee-jerk reactions, that we all know too well. Something happens to us that tells the mind, next time, do this instead. The second way is how the mind subconsciously teaches the body to adapt itself to perform actions at will. Huxley gives the example of a parrot that over time learns to manipulate its beak, tongue, and throat to mimic the sounds made by a human's lips, teeth, palate, and vocal cords. The third way is best illustrated by the familiar experience of nervous indigestion. Like a person experiences dyspepsia due to negative emotions such as fear, envy, anger, hatred. And as a side note, I'm going to plug one of my favorite books, and that would be Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender by David R. Hawkins, MD. This remarkable book and implementing it into my life helped me recover from some of the physical ailments brought on by my near-death experience because it illuminated how my anger, fear, guilt, and a bunch of other damaging emotions and feelings were affecting my internal state. And I'm not even kidding that after practicing the teachings in that book, I nearly lost 100 pounds. And my doctors honestly were amazed at my recovery. They just kept saying, just whatever you're doing, just keep doing that. And once again, that is Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender by David R. Hawkins, MD. But jumping back to the perennial philosophy, the fourth way takes us beyond the body. Huxley reminds us that the divine ground isn't separate from the world around us, but in and through everything. So if we truly realize this, if we see that the external world and the internal experience are one and the same, then perhaps the mind, attuned to this truth, can affect both. And this brings us to the heart of what the mystics seem to have known all along. The world outside of us and the world within are reflections of the same divine reality. So in realizing this, they were able to transcend ordinary limitations, touching the external world through the divine unity they perceived. But while these supernatural experiences are fascinating, they aren't the goal. The methods we use to seek the divine, whether through prayer, meditation, or mystical experiences, are wonderful tools. But I think it's important not to get trapped or cling to the method itself. These experiences can point us toward the divine. But the real journey, I feel, lies in the quiet, everyday moments of connection and reflection. I also find in something that more recently I've been really tuned into, and it's really blowing my mind, is that if we take the time to study nature, we will find that it, too, is an ongoing message from the divine. It's truly incredible. The rhythms of the natural world, the changing seasons, the growth of a tree, the stillness of the stars, are all such an amazing reflection of the divine, just as much as the supernatural encounters we've explored. The world around us is always speaking, always showing us glimpses of that deeper reality if we're just willing to listen and take notice. The mystics remind us that the path to the divine doesn't require visions or miraculous events. It's present in every moment, every breath, and every thought. The fantastical elements of these stories are intriguing. Yeah, they're cool. I love listening to these, and I love talking about them. But they are just one way of experiencing the divine. Ultimately, it's in the quiet awareness of the divine ground, present in both nature and in our everyday lives, that we find true peace and understanding. And with that, thank you so much for joining me on my first Halloween episode of Mystican Identity. It's been fun. And until next time, may you find peace in the unknown and wonder in the unseen. I wish you and your loved ones all the best and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.